skip over it. So we're ready to start the book of Judges tonight. And if you look at the first handout, or the first question on your handout, there's actually a two-part question. I'm going to leave that first part out because we never get through our discussion anyway, so I just kind of want to focus on the second part of this question. But the question is this: what is one adult responsibility that you dislike? I didn't even think of that one. What'd you say? Paying bills. Okay. Yeah, those are two good ones. I didn't think of either one of those. Paying bills, taxes, cleaning. Yeah, I don't like to clean either. Oh, his wife is telling on him. Maybe he just dreams about it. Yeah, there's some things, being an adult comes with responsibilities, right? And there's some responsibilities that we probably don't mind a bit. We might even enjoy those things. But there's also other responsibilities that are not that enjoyable. And I want us to think about that from the perspective of Israel and the land of Canaan. Now, it's kind of interesting to me. You think about Israel, and from the time that God called Abraham, and they were really nomads, weren't they? I mean, they were people who were just wandering about on the face of the earth, and they didn't really have a land or a place that they could call their own. Remember, Abraham lived his life wandering throughout the promised land. And of course, you have Isaac and you have Jacob. You have all those men who, basically, the Bible tells us in Hebrews chapter 11, didn't really have a place to call their own. Now, what's the only piece of land that Abraham owned? Does anybody know? Yeah, he did own one piece of land, but it was a burial plot. It wasn't where he lived, but it was where he was buried and where his ancestors were buried too. And so, think about what kept these people going. In the back of their minds, they had this land that had been promised to them by God one day. And of course, we know that when they came up out of the land of Egypt, they were slaves in Egypt too. They didn't own any land down there either. But when they came up out of that land of Egypt, they came out with the prospect of inheriting this land. And what do you think were some of the responsibilities? Obviously, there are a lot of responsibilities that came along with inheriting this land. But what would you think would be some of those that they probably didn't care for too much? Yeah, in my mind, the worst part, being excited about getting a new homeland and inheriting, there was some great stuff there that they inherited. And, that would have been exciting stuff. But to fight those battles, and to have to drive those people out, to kill those people, and sometimes the women and the children along with them, that could not have been an enjoyable process. I'm not saying that, to criticize the judgment of God or anything like that. I know God's righteous. He does right. He's always going to do right. And that's what was right in that situation. But as a human being, that would have been a responsibility that would have been a very difficult one, I think. And so we read about the children of Israel, and really I bring that up because the book of Judges is really about them failing to fulfill that responsibility. And from a human perspective, we can look at that and we can probably understand a little bit, why it would be, why at times they failed, why they didn't kill all these people, why they didn't drive all of them out. But it was certainly a responsibility that God had laid upon them. And it's just like any other responsibility that God gives us. There's going to be some things that are enjoyable, pleasant about it. There's going to be some other things that we might not care for too much. But just kind of keep that in mind as we go through the book of Judges here. So let's start here in chapter 1. And if I can, let's get a reader and somebody read. Does anybody feel like reading the first 9 verses there? Is that too many?
Verse 9.
Yes, sir.
Chapter 1.
Yes, sir.
Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall go up before us against the Canaanites first, to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand. And Judah said to Simeon, his brother, Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites.
Okay, so we're reading about the time period after the death of Joshua, verse 1. And this is the time period that we know as the space that Israel had judges. And a couple of things that start this event. What's the history of the children of Israel during the days of Joshua? Yeah, were they faithful? Yeah, during the days of Joshua. Remember, Joshua succeeded Moses as the leader of the children of Israel. During the days of Joshua, Israel was faithful to God. After Joshua died, they started messing around with these other nations that were dwelling around them. They started intermingling with them, and it was very, very soon that they fell away from God. And what you have throughout the book of Judges is you have the judgment of God coming upon his people. He'd allowed them to be taken captive or be put under tribute by a nation. And then they would start crying out to God, and they decide, well, we're going to change. We're going to follow after God. And so God would raise up a judge, and as long as that judge was alive, they'd serve God. But when that judge died, then they'd go right back into their ways. In fact, the Bible says it just got worse and worse and worse. They'd even go back deeper and deeper into wickedness and evil. And the book of Judges is just like this up and down period, They fall away from God. God judges them, raises up a deliverer. They're faithful during the days of that deliverer. He dies. They go right back to their ways. And so that's kind of, when I think about the book of Judges, that's kind of the way that I think of it, just an up and down battle for the faithfulness and the hearts of the children of Israel. So we read in verse 1 here. Now, it started out great, the book of Judges does. You read about all these victories and all these enemies that are being conquered and all these battles that are being won. And question number 2 on your handout is here. What were the Israelites concerned about there in verse 1? What they want to know?
Who's going to fight?
Yeah, who's going to go first, right? And think about why they'd be asking this. Now, Joshua, they've had a leader for a number of years. They've had Moses, they've had Joshua, and when it came to time to do these things, they said, here's what you're going to do. Here's who's going to go first. They don't have a leader anymore, right? There was no successor that came after Joshua. Why was that the case? Did God want them to have a leader?
He wanted to be there.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? But he wanted to be their leader, didn't he? He didn't want to have that key figure, that human figure, that physical presence that they were always turning to and looking for. And so God, in his infinite wisdom, decreed that I'm going to be your leader. You're going to look to me for guidance and any of your questions that you need answered. That's exactly what they start doing. Immediately they want to figure out who's going to go first in fighting this battle. And so we read about 2 different tribes joining up forces. What 2 tribes are those? Yeah, Judah and Simeon. And so why do you think these 2 tribes joined forces? Do you have anybody study a little bit or do a little bit of background research on these 2 tribes? Yeah, they actually inherited part within the tribe of Judah itself. So, number 1, it would just make sense naturally, wouldn't it? Because they were basically going to be fighting in the same area. So, why don't you help me out and I'll help you out? Is there anything else that might explain why they chose to do this? Yeah, they were brothers. Let's see, which one was it? Does anybody know? Yeah, which concubine? No, it wasn't a concubine, was it? It was Leah. Yeah, I think. Right? Didn't she have those 2 sons? Okay, don't quote me on it, but I think that's.
Rachel's the one that had 2.
Yeah. Well, she had more than 2, but they were blood brothers. Yeah, Leah had several, but Judah, of course, would have been one of those, and then Simeon, I think, was another one. So they were literally from the same mother. And so it wasn't like they were stepbrothers, but I think they were flesh and blood. If I'm wrong, call me out or tell me differently. Somebody can can find what I'm messing up here. What else can you think of? Is there any other reason why they would? Yeah, and what's interesting, if you go back to the census, to the numbering of the children of Israel, remember before they came and they fought against the inhabitants of the land, the children of Israel were numbered. And Judah was the largest tribe. I think they had 70-some thousand warriors or soldiers in that tribe. Simeon was the smallest. They only had 20-some thousand soldiers or people who were of fighting age in that particular tribe. And so you have one of those instances where obviously, could Simeon have gone out and fought by themselves and won? Well, yeah, God was on their side. But it had to be pretty comforting when Judah says, hey, you want to come fight with us? Yeah, you bet. We can do this together. Yes, sir.
You said that part of Simeon's lot was actually inside Judah's, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
From the viewpoint of Judah, them being allies makes sense because even though they follow God, these are still people, and there's always vying for clout or politics, which is a dirty word for politics. So knowing that the guy who actually is inside your borders is your closest ally and not allied with someone else when it comes to the inner workings of however they're trying to govern themselves below the level of God.
Yeah.
It would make sense.
Yeah. And, when you look at this conquering, obviously the major strongholds had been conquered of these people around Israel. They'd broken the people of the land. I think what you have is you had some mopping up that was left to do. You had these strongholds, these little pockets here and there, and then it was kind of up to these tribes individually, to go out here and to clean up these places and to run out the rest of the inhabitants. But there's a number of reasons why this agreement could have taken place, and of course I think all of them make perfect sense. So what happens? Question number 4 here. What happens when Judah attacks the Canaanites? It's not just the Canaanites, right? It's Perizzites too. Basically, it's anybody they attack. What happens? Yeah, they win, don't they? It's just victory after victory. And they were doing exactly what God had commanded them to do. God had commanded them, you go in here and you drive out the rest of these people. And so they were attacking the enemy, just like God had commanded them to do, and they were driving these people out of the borders of their land. Who was given the credit, though, for Judah's success in battle? What does verse 4 say?
Lord.
Yeah, it was the Lord. And I want you to stop and to think, again, we talk about this a lot, but should be probably a lot more emphasized and said about it. These people that they were fighting against, it wasn't like they were just weak colonies and didn't have any armies and didn't have any weapons or anything like that. These were some powerful nations and some powerful strongholds. And the only reason that Israel was able to defeat them is because God was on their side. If God hadn't been on their side, could they have won those battles? No. But God says, when I'm with you, you're not going to have to worry. You're going to drive these people out. You're going to have easy victories. And that's exactly what they were doing. Why were they able to conquer the enemy? Yeah, if God's for us, right? Romans 8:31, who's going to be against us? Who's going to be able to stand against us? So if the reason that they were winning is because God was with them, when we start reading about them losing, why are they losing? Makes sense that God's not with them, right? And we're going to read about some of these instances and think about them a little bit and ask the question, well, why? Why is it the case that they went from winning all these battles to all of a sudden they start losing some of these battles? So the Lord was on their side. He was with them. And when he was with them, they were winning victory after victory. They were able to conquer these people. Let's go down to verse 19. There's some other stories that take place there, and you kind of read some of those on your own. verses 19 through 26 for us, please.
The Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the 3 sons of Anak. And the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. And the house of Joseph, they also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph sent to cry Bethel. Now the name of the city before was Luz. The spies saw a man come forth out of the city, and they said unto him, Show us, we pray thee, the entrance unto the city, and we'll show thee mercy. And when he showed them the entrance into the city, they smote the city with the edge of the sword, but they let go the man and all his family. And man went into the land of the Hittites, and built the city, and called the name thereof Luz, which is the name thereof unto this day.
Okay, left out one question here. We'll back up just a minute, number 6 here. For what did Adonai-Bezek think God had paid him back? Remember we read about a king there that Judah captured. What'd they do to him that was unique? Yeah, cut both his thumbs and his big toes off. Why?
That's what he did to the kings that he.
Yeah, he himself made the statement, and some people say he was just bragging. They don't think he really had that many kings under his table. I don't know. He may have, he may not have. But he made the statement. He had done that to 70 kings. You know, he conquered 70 kings, and then he put them sitting around his table and fed them the scraps from the table. Now, why would they cut off their thumbs and their big toes?
Balance, you can hold the sword.
Yeah, evidently, I don't know. I've always had mine. But evidently, you can't run or at least very well without a big toe. It's part of what balances or helps to balance you. And so it took away their ability to flee. And the second thing is, if you don't have a thumb, it's kind of hard to hold on to something, isn't it? They could never hold a sword and fight in a battle again. And so some people, you know, it's interesting when you read about his statement. It's not like when he's talking about what happened to him, what Israel did to him, like it was some savage thing. You know, how did he describe it? What did he say it was? Yeah, he said it was God paying him back. What is God's judgment upon him? You know, I did this to all these men, and now God's seeing fit that it's done to me. And so again, would have been one of those things. I don't think I would have been the one who cut his fingers and his toes off, or his thumbs and his toes off, but it was something that was from the judgment of God. So we read about Judah. Gary read about Judah for us there, beginning in verse 19. How is it obvious that God is with these men of Judah?
Because they drove out, didn't they?
Yeah, you look at verse 19. It says the Lord was with Judah. They drove out the people in the mountains. You know, every time God's with them, they're winning. Every time that God is on their side, victory after victory after victory. But then in the midst of this statement of all these victories that are being won, you have the statement, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland. I'm reading from the New King James Version here. Because they had chariots of iron. And so my question here, question number 8 is, why were the men of Judah unable to drive out these enemies?
Is it because they let that man live?
Okay, that's...
Weren't they instructed to kill everyone?
Yeah, I think that's actually a couple different tribes than Judah, isn't it? Of that story, the house of Joseph there in verse 22, which would have been Manasseh and Ephraim. So why could they not defeat these people with chariots of iron?
Probably didn't think they could.
Yeah. Listen, if God was on their side, could they have defeated chariots of iron?
Sure.
Yeah. there's no chariot of iron that's going to stand against God's people when he's on their side, right? What's happening here? You're having this transition where the people are stopping driving out all these people, and they're starting to get a little bit complacent, and they're starting to compromise. We didn't read, but if you back up to verse 16, just look at it real quickly. It says, "Now the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah," that's who we're talking about here, "into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people." So here you have Judah, and you have another part of Moses' family who joined up with them along the way. And they go out, and instead of driving these people out, they're living right there with them, aren't they? They're dwelling among them.
Like you said, they're complacent, but they're starting to go away from God, I think, at that point. That's why they couldn't drive them out.
Yeah, and so why did they live in among them? Why didn't they keep on driving them out? Why'd they change? Okay. Could have been some relation there. Anybody else?
The hard thing is that when you fear God, you fear for the living person. That's a hard thing.
Yeah. And I mean, they were human. Again, sometimes we read about these people and we think, well, they were somewhere above humanity, but they were just ordinary people like we were. And here you are, you're winning all these battles, and you come to this stronghold of people, and they've got chariots of iron. And you haven't defeated people like this yet. You've fought all these other battles and you've won all them. And so what do you think they start thinking? Yeah, maybe this one is one we lose. Maybe we can't run them out. Maybe it's going to take too much effort, or too much energy, or maybe there's going to be casualties. If we go out and we fight these guys, when we conquered all these other places, so why don't we just leave them alone? Why don't we just let them dwell there, and then we'll go out here and we'll fight some of these other people and leave them where they are? I mean, it's just human nature, isn't it? But that's kind of the idea you get there in verse 16, where Judah goes out here and they start dwelling among some of these other people. And so when they do that, they start losing some of these battles. They stop fighting some of these enemies that they're supposed to be fighting and start forming alliances with them instead. So we read about the tribes of Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim, and God helps them out, right? We read about, verse 22? The house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And so how was God with them? How did God help them capture the town of Bethel? Yeah, they come across a man, and they ask him, they say, if you show us the entrance into this city, then we'll show you mercy, you and your family. Well, you have to think in that day and age, these guys were going in there and they were killing everybody. And so was it a little bit selfish? Probably, yeah. Would we have done the same thing? We probably would have. I mean, if you knew that you were going to die anyway. But these were certainly worldly individuals. And so he didn't have any trouble showing them the entrance to the city, and they in turn showed him mercy and showed his family mercy too. But God was with them, and God helped them to win that battle. And then you read about, in verses 27 through the end of the chapter here, you read about battle after battle that these tribes are losing, or that these inhabitants that they're not driving out. There's this entire list, groups of people. So question number 10 is, why do you think God saw fit to list these groups of people that Israel didn't drive out? Why would he record that?
If they ain't gonna do what he says to do, it ain't gonna work.
Well, yeah, we talked a couple of weeks ago, I think we talked about one of the reasons that we have the stories in the Bible is to learn from them, right? And this is a story that speaks to us as Christians today. What are we supposed to do to the enemy? We're supposed to fight, aren't we? We're supposed to drive them out. We're supposed to, are we supposed to wrap our arm around sin and say, hey, come over here, buddy, and sit down with me for a while? No, sin is the enemy, right? And it's our job to fight against the enemy. What happens when we don't? Well, we're just like the children of Israel. You know, sometimes we fight some hard battles and we get satisfied and we say, we've won all these victories, you know. What's one or two victories over here that we don't fight? Or one or two victories over here that we don't win? And so I think we're a lot like those Israelites. You know, we get satisfied with where we are. We get complacent. We don't want to have struggles like they did. We don't want to put forth the energy and the effort. We don't want to make the sacrifices that are essential sometimes to fighting the enemy. And so what do? We compromise just like they did. So what's significant? Question 11 here. And we read about the rest of this chapter, how Israel doesn't subdue this promised land completely. How does that play into the history of the children of Israel?
They've got a thorn of different beliefs and a whole lot.
Yeah, it was trouble the rest of their time in that land, wasn't it? Because they didn't drive these people out, then they started intermingling with them. They started forming alliances with them. And pretty soon they were acting just like they were. You know, they were just as wicked and just as evil as these people that God had chosen to drive out of this land. They worshipped idols, just like these people did too. And so it hurt them, didn't it? It hurt them by not doing what God commanded them to do. And, you know, that's one of the things that the Bible emphasizes to us. The things that God tells us to do, they're for our own good, aren't they? I mean, they're not to cause harm to us. Why did God want these people driven out? Because he knew if they didn't, then they were going to form alliances with him, and they were going to drag them down, and they'd be in exactly the same spot as these people were before. So, what is the Lord? Well, we read about him withdrawing his help from Israel. We're not actually into chapter 2, but I put that in there because I want to emphasize it to you. There's two verses that are really key here. I think go over to chapter 2 real quickly here, and look with me at verses 2 and 3. Remember, here's what God had told them. He said, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land, but you shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall be thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. You know, God had warned them about this very situation, and because they didn't do what he told them to do, God says, now you're going to reap what you sow. You know, you're going to reap the consequences of not driving these people out. And again, idols, you know, intermarriages, all kinds of relationships were formed because they did not drive these people out of this land. Let's think about one verse here. Let me see if I can find it real quickly. Probably can't. Well, maybe it'll ring a bell for me here in a minute. But anyway, they didn't do what God told them to do. Because of that, God said, I'm not going to drive them out anymore. You know, if you're not going to listen, if you're not going to obey, then you want them to stay, they're going to stay right here with you, and they're going to affect you. There's going to be some consequences to reap because of that. So, question 13. This is kind of the application part of it. How does God want us to react when we learn of sin in our lives? Yeah, he wants us to fight. Sin's the enemy, isn't it? Attack. Drive out the enemy. We can't compromise with sin. You know, we can't become complacent and say, well, we're going to win this battle and we're going to fight this battle, but we're not going to do this one. You know, we're not going to fight against this sin or this enemy because it's too powerful. You know, or maybe there's something that we derive, some benefit that we derive from having it around. A lot of these people, what did Israel do to these people? Yeah, they put them under tribute, which means they benefited from having them around, didn't they? I mean, they were basically their slaves. So, from a human perspective, they're saying, hey, we can make money, we got free labor, why would we want to drive these people out? You know, but that's what God told them to do.
Kind of like the Gibeonites did. So that to me is like what the beginning of that really happened, where they tricked them and they didn't completely annihilate them or run them out. They kept them as free labor, basically.
Yeah, they
That was in Joshua.
Right. Yeah. The Gibeonites, they pulled one over, but Israel should have consulted with God first before making that agreement with them. And then they were kind of in a difficult situation where they'd given them their word and they didn't want to go back on it. But yeah, that was really the beginning of it, wasn't it? And those people stayed around. They're still there when the temple was being built, but that was the beginning of some of the compromise that existed. But again, there were physical benefits that they reaped from having them around. Are there physical pleasures or benefits that come with sin? Yeah, there are. But in the end, it's going to kill you. In the end, in the long run, it's going to be worse off for you, just like these inhabitants. So, question number 14, what happens to our relationship with the Lord when we turn away from sin? What does sin do? Yeah, remember Isaiah 59, 1 and 2? It keeps God at a distance. God can't hear us. We don't have the ear of God because we're sinners. We're not obeying His law. And it keeps us out of His reach. God can't help us if we're not willing to turn away from sin. And so, if sin keeps the ear and the arm of God away from us, what happens when we turn away from sin? It gives us the ear of God and the arm of God. And that's what you're reading about here. I mean, when these people did what God told them to do, the arm of God was with them. God was listening to them. God was fighting their battles. They were winning. But when they started turning away from God, God couldn't stand to be around them because of their sin. And then question number 15, just kind of a personal question. You can think about it, but we all have God-given responsibilities and jobs and roles and tasks. Sometimes there's obstacles that get in our way that keep us from fulfilling those responsibilities. That was the inhabitants of the children of Israel, or the Canaanites for the children of Israel. They had a job, they had a task that God had given them to do. They allowed these people to get in their way and to keep them from fulfilling their God-given responsibilities and duties. So let's learn from them, and not become too complacent in our lives. Not be willing to compromise, and things will work out a lot better for us than they did for them. All right, anybody got any thoughts or comments?